Joining us today is Andrew Revkin, an environmental journalist who's been in the forefront of climate change coverage for over 3 decades. From his writing at the New York Times to his role as an educator, Andrew's work has helped shape how we understand the climate crisis and its solutions. Andrew, welcome to Sustainability Matters.
It's really great to be with you.
Your work, it spans journalism, education, policy. You launched your first blog on sustainability. I think I remember that. That was an early education for me. How have you seen this evolution of climate communications over the years?
Well, I kind of lived it. You know, in the early '80s, I got out of Columbia Journalism grad school, and I labeled myself a science writer. So the foreground issues I dealt with were kind of the basic science of. And in my first article on global warming, on the climate change, wasn't about global warming. It was about nuclear winter, that if we had enough explosions in cities after a nuclear war, that it would chill the climate. But it was all about the sort of physics of it. And of course, there's politics to nuclear war too. But 1988 was my first big story on global warming, cover of Discover magazine. And still, I was focused on seas will rise, CO2 changes the atmosphere, holds in more heat, et cetera. So it was like the mechanistic approach. And it took me years through my time getting to the New York Times before I started talking more to social scientists about why we ignore risks like this, why people get divided over policy on something like clean energy, which seems like a no-brainer. There was a piece I did for the Times one day, yelling fire on a hot planet. It was like 2006. And I interviewed a social scientist, Helen Ingram, and she said, you know, the things that people vote on are things that are soon, salient, and certain. And climate change is not like that. It's got all these elements. It's got uncertainty, complexity. Yes, some aspects are happening now, but the big bad things are mostly in the future. And at the same time, of course, the media are changing. You know, I was at the New York Times. I started there in 1995 when there was still the printing presses would run in Times Square. You could feel the building vibrate. And then that ended. And, you know, slowly we became a digital operation. And I had these revelatory moments that led to my blogging, which were that, hey, you know, I can actually have a conversation with my readers. Right. And when I started interacting with readers, it became my learning curve expanded. New ideas, new questions about climate came to me. So I've lived through that digital landscape. And now, unfortunately, the digital side has become polluted. The media environment is polluted now in ways that are really, to me, as problematic as climate and the other forms of pollution in the actual environment.
Is there a medium that you're finding works better to be able to get to the folks that you need to get to? And are you finding that you can get to the folks that maybe we need to get to?
Oh, those are such good questions. To me, not all of this is about journalism anymore. A great story is still a captivating tool. And the work that ProPublica does, where I worked briefly in investigative journalism, is absolutely essential, especially in the environment we're in right now, where so much information is not open to the public. The innovations that give me a lot of hope are not always in newsrooms. One is an entity called Global Press. It's almost 20 years old, based in DC, but it's evolved as it's a worldwide network of female reporters, particularly in countries struggling with the worst problems you can imagine, poverty and lack of clean water and exposure to climate hazards. And they train these distributed journalists in ways that are very special. They protect them because they're women particularly. And just recently, when the U.S. Agency for International Development money was abruptly cut off, there was a young woman in Uganda, a reporter, who immediately was able to describe to the world, this is the direct impact right now. There's an Ebola outbreak, and we can't, nothing's being done about it. So that feels to me like really important. Ian Urbina, who used to be at the New York Times, created this thing called Outlaw Ocean Project. And his team, their beat is the oceans beyond national boundaries, where a lot of illegal fishing is going on, oil, different kinds of extraction, illegal shipping, and that fills a gap too. But it's very different than training a woman in Uganda to be a journalist and a photographer So we need all of that. And data, making sure people, whether you're considering buying a home or moving to a new town or whatever, making sure you have access to information so you can understand the hazards that are there. If you go to Redfin or Zillow, in the last few years, they've all started listing the flood history of homes. And that, to me, is just as important as journalism innovation.
So recently we've seen a switch in the way we're hearing about climate. We've seen a change in the investments in climate and in renewable energy and in foreign aid. How do you see that impacting these conversations? How do you see that impacting our efforts to combat climate change? And what are some things that you think that we can all be thinking about to counteract that?
Well, we're in a moving landscape here, which makes it really hard to have a single answer to that question. Like right up until December, when the presidency tipped, I was making the point that because of the Inflation Reduction Act, that big multi-billion-dollar investment by the country and clean energy transition and the like, the gap there in information flow and communication was that communities had to understand that if their buses are getting old, their school buses, they can now get a very quick payoff loan to do electric buses. But it's all at the community level that understanding has to be ingested. And Jigar Shah, who was running the Energy Department's big loan program, said, look, we're in the government. We can't tell you what to do, but we have all these resources. We need someone at the community scale, just a person, what some back in the day used to call connected mavens. We all know someone at the local scale who is the person who's building a Facebook group or seems to know how to work with the local town council. Enabling folks like that to say, hey, at a town council meeting, hey, we can transition to clean energy buses and it pays itself off in a year, and here's how. So it enters that conversation locally. And that's true, anywhere in the country. So that was the model until like December. And now, I think in a way, even now with the collapse of some funding, the collapse of regulatory history at a bunch of agencies, I think the role of local journalism and local community communicativeness, is that a word, has never been more important, so that you can build conversations that are not red-blue, but about opportunity or cost. And that's like a work in progress right now, I think. But that's sort of where the focus should be.
Well, there's often a gap between the data or the science and the policy. I think about something like solar power, where it can have a financial payback. We just need to make sure that people understand that there's a financial payback. And so some of those data points need to be communicated in the right ways to different people. How do you see us being able to bridge that gap now?
Well, there too, I think, I live in Maine, and Maine has had its own program to get heat pumps out and around, even before the IRA, the federal funding. And there, I think that's another place where communicativeness makes a big difference. Same thing with solar. In Canada, there's a project to use mapping to build the conversation about the benefits of it, but through data and awareness at the community scale. So if you go to this website, you say, wow, all my neighbors are doing X, why am I not doing it? Same thing with weatherization, insulation. In England, there was a really interesting study on how information about the benefits of making your house more insulated for heat or cold, how that making those benefits clear. And they used visuals to do this, sort of an infrared image of a home, shows you vividly where energy is leaking. And a woman at Plymouth University who I've had on my webcast, they did a deeper study where they showed people the information 3 ways. One was just the words, one was with the images, and one was where the image was your house. then they had a longitudinal study, like for over a year, how many people actually did something. And that's the real key. It's not so, oh, wow, that's interesting.
Right.
That doesn't get, who actually did something is what's interesting. And they found more actual concrete action. So the more personal, the more dynamic the opportunities are for the individual, then you can get, there's evidence that,
Sure.
makes a difference. Science matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Social science, behavioral science matters too.
And people respond to sort of visual understanding,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of that.
Yeah.
We built the NY Solar Map here in New York City. And since we built, very similar to what you described, and since that happened, we've seen this hockey stick growth in solar here in New York City. So it certainly plays out. So we hear a lot, climate crisis. There's hurricanes. There's a lot of scary information that's out there. That information certainly brings eyeballs to the folks that are printing it or showing it online.
Right.
And I think it can be very overwhelming to folks. What's your sense of how we can start to move away from sort of the doomism and start to help people understand about climate risk or climate change in a way that can help us move towards being able to take action?
One of my revelatory moments came, as I said earlier, with this idea that climate change is just one component of what drives climate risk. And I think for too long, including in the magazine articles that I wrote back in the 80s, this was conveyed as this monumental change in the atmosphere and the climate, which it is. Climate change is so big and so amorphous, and it's also, there's a complexity monster aspect to it, that it feels paralytic. But as you start to say, you use questions to break that into pieces, and an amazing landscape of opportunities comes around. That's why I call my webcast these days, Sustain What? Like sustainability, to me, it is a word with a meaning, but my guess is the meaning in your head and someone's head who's watching and mine is different. So I always try to start with sustain what, for whom, how. And as soon as you break it in pieces, you start to reveal pathways for action. And on climate change versus climate risk, when you have risk in your head, when you wake up, risk is the hazard, flood, sea level rise, storms, heat, whatever. But you have to, it's times exposure, how many people, how much stuff, and then factoring in vulnerability.
Right.
It's an actual formula. And the disaster researchers I talk to, they kind of wake up with that in their heads. And now that's my pathway to not just sanity, but impact. Because then you could say, well, our town has, because of our building codes, we have built vulnerability and exposure, as is the case with that horrible Palisades fire in California. Those houses, most of the houses that burned, that whole neighborhood was built prior to stricter building codes. There were fire-wise building codes. So then you can start to say, well, okay, they were grandfathered in. Now that we're going to rebuild there, what do we do to factor in fire as a living, normal part of our ecosystem when we build forward, not build back? Mm-hmm. There were two teams. It was the University of Michigan and Michigan Health Department did an assessment of people who were harmed in both cold and heat in cities like Detroit. And the remedies for both are the same, meaning insulated, access to housing that's well insulated. Then it's not about climate change. It's about getting our community to be fully resilient in the facing extremes that a city like Detroit or Minneapolis, or there are many cities, New York, where heat and cold are harming people right now. And the logic of doing one thing that has multiple benefits is just so clear. What you're also doing is rebuilding trust between communities and journalism.
Right.
You know, if you're trying to force a story, a narrative down someone's throat or into their brain, there's an implicit resistance to that model. And I think that that's not productive right now.
Yeah, yeah. I want to come back to for a second to your comment about moving to thinking about climate risk, because I think it speaks directly to this idea that you are discussing, climate impact directly with the person or the people that you're trying to communicate with. I guess I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you came to that shift.
Yeah,
yourself.
sure. It was through my webcasting. Early in the pandemic, I started this Sustain What thing as my project while I was teaching. I was working at Columbia University. And early on, I had Diana Liverman on, who's now retired. She was at the University of Arizona, one of the lead author for those past climate panel reports, the IPCC.
Mm-hmm.
And she said something profoundly simple and that really nailed me. She said, people, when we think about climate risk, you're thinking about the probability of the hazard when you should be thinking about the probability of harm.
Mm-hmm.
So the probability of hazard is there going to be a thunderstorm? The probability of harm is, are we safe from thunderstorms? And that just resonates in my head all the time. I quote her all the time. I also had on during the Pacific Northwest heat wave, that horrible heat dome, Christy Ebi, E-B-I, at the University of Washington, who's like one of the world's experts on health and climate and heat particularly. And she said, nobody needs to die in a heat wave. And she said that to me several times. And I keep putting that audio clip, that video clip on social media to remind people that most what happens in what we call a disaster is not natural. It's the result of human decisions or indecision. Yeah. And those things resonate always. And then the other thing was just my reporting. I think in the year 2002, 23 years ago, at the New York Times, I wrote about a study in the journal Nature that looked at multi-thousand-year histories of extreme flood storms in the Northeast, so upstate New York, Vermont, and they looked at them they got that history by looking at the beds of lakes. When you have a storm in Vermont, if the storm is severe enough, it creates a scouring flood and the gravel goes down into the lake. So you have mud, gravel, mud, gravel, and that's like a history book. And they found that this region, the Northeast, has been pummeled by extreme, like mega storms through the last several thousand years in a pattern that would make it impossible to say, let's say in 2030, if we have another huge flooding storm like Vermont has had off and on, that there's a global warming component there. So you can debate about, is global warming changing storms? Or you can actually say, our communities are not well adapted to these scouring floods that are a normal part of this climate system here, with or without global warming. And then that came up over and over again, that same pattern in different parts of the world, looking at different studies of climate history, really sobered me about the importance of understanding those inherent sources of danger, along with the things that climate change through the buildup of CO2 is doing. And we're then taking that back to the risk formula. It's like, we better really work hard on exposure and vulnerability, even as we work hard to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Right. We can argue about all these things, but these risks are
And those are important kind of technical questions, but they're not questions that help a community decide how to be safer.
Finding your way in, knowing that you have this broader goal of impacting climate. What are some other sort of innovative ways that you've seen folks or yourself be able to bring these issues to bear for the broader public? Yeah,
well, one thing that excites me, especially for young aspiring journalists or communicators, is you can still create something new that didn't exist before and get at one of these facets of this challenge, the communication challenge around issues like climate and sustainability. And examples include Amy Westerfeld, who's came out of public radio, and she does investigative podcasting, Drilled, and she's done great work. It's for one particular facet of the issue, accountability by companies that deceived or delayed communities in relation to climate response. And she's just doggedly determined to kind of drill into that innovation. And I just think that's the kind of thing that's fantastic. I really like to see during the pandemic, this is not climate specific, but it's the same problem, the same issue. The Atlantic Monthly, they had Ed Yong writing what became Pulitzer Prize winning narrative journalism about the impacts of the pandemic. But early on, they also realized there were these data gaps, and there was no easy way to figure out where the infection rates were high, and they created a COVID tracker that on social media, I was kind of pushing for that to be part of the Pulitzer Prize, that it was essentially, they created a go-to place for data around the pandemic that no one, including the government, had yet pulled together. And that's a public service form of journalism. Mm-hmm. So it's all those dimensions, and we need all of them. We do need narrative journalism. Global Press, I think, is, again, a great example of building a network of protected and supported journalists in places that are vulnerable. Now, that's international, but it could happen in the United States. Report for America has gotten grants to support climate-focused journalists distributed in places around the country, like Mississippi, where there's no decent coverage at all. So fostering local journalism with this idea of climate risk in the foreground, I think, is a key opportunity right now.
And you've been immersed in this arena now for a long time.
Yeah.
What keeps you up at night?
Well, right now, the political superstorm we're in, we have a political environment, a media environment, and the actual environment, and they're all turbulent and polluted. And I am constantly waking up sort of thinking, oh my God, like many people these days. But I get over that through the course of most days because I see some example, some little prismatic component of progress, whether it's other writers on Substack who are where I now write and who are doing innovative approaches to conveying issues, not just stories, or in a conversation, or I'll see a Facebook group where I live in Maine focused on long-term sustainability at the community level. And that takes me through. And also music. I'm a songwriter, and that keeps me going too. So the sleeplessness is there, but I usually wake up energized and at least having one thing to do through the course of a day, one conversation, one social media component that I'll pursue that isn't just liking something or unliking something, but trying to create a connection that keeps me going.
Yeah, it's every one of us has something we can do.
Yeah, and I will say, one of the other biggest needs right now is for consumers of information to become more active parts of the process. The whole system is designed to not make that happen. These algorithms that rule our attention are designed to take us down, literally down, scrolling. Scrolling was an invention. There's no reason that scrolling exists other than it was designed. And so your attention is being captured. And there are people who've created really good open source learning tools for how to get through this, how to do better as a consumer and then sharer of information yourself. There's a woman at University of Rhode Island named Renee Hobbs, who has a website, I think it's called Mind Over Media. And she teaches teachers how to teach propaganda literacy. And that isn't, the New York Times doesn't have time to do that, but we all can do that. It's an open source website. There's another one from the University of Washington called Calling Bull with 4 more letters at the end. callingbull.org. That's about data literacy. And it's open, free for anyone to learn or to share with your kids, or ways to not just turn off the media, but to understand what's out there and to do a little better. And that stuff to me is really crucial too.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's on each one of us. Every one of us can understand, can help get information out there, can help others understand the climate and the risks and the things that we can all do. And I mean, you have really helped us to shape how we think about sustainability and climate change over the last couple of decades. So thank you for all the work that you've been doing. And thanks for coming into studio with us here today.
It's an honor. It really is. Nice to talk with you.
Please share your thoughts with us on social media. How do you stay informed on climate issues? We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to download our CUNY TV app to stay updated on future episodes. Next month, we'll explore biodiversity, why it matters, and what's at stake. Stay informed, stay engaged, and see you next time on Sustainability Matters.
It took 1,000 generations for our species to rise. To gather and hunt and was no way to get by. We yearned to burn more than dung and sticks. And someone came along and said, hey, try lighting this. He opened up the ground and showed us coal and oil. Said, come liberate some carbon, it'll make your blood boil. Liberated carbon, it'll spin your wheels. Liberated carbon, it'll nuke your meals. Liberated carbon, it'll turn your night to day. Come on and liberate some carbon, babe, it's the American way.